I was having my morning coffee peacefully on a Tuesday morning when a woman rang my doorbell and said, "I met your husband 20 years ago." What she told me in the next 15 minutes destroyed 55 years of marriage and made me discover that I had been living a lie bigger than I could ever have imagined. My name is Eleanor. I'm 78 years old. I was born in 1946, right here in rural Pennsylvania, in a small town where everyone knew everyone. Today I'm here to tell you a story that happened to me 3 years ago when I was 75. A story that broke me inside, that made me question everything I believed about my life, about my marriage, about the man I shared more than half a century with. But it's also a story of overcoming, of how God can transform even the worst betrayals into blessings we never expected to receive. Before I start, I'd like to ask you folks watching right now for a little favor. If you could leave a like on this video, I'd be really happy, and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales too, because I have other stories to tell. Life stories, stories of overcoming, things that happened to me that might help someone going through difficult times. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, what city, what state. I love knowing that my words are reaching so many different places. It warms my heart. Now then, let's get to my story. It was a Tuesday morning, March 5th, 2022. I remember the exact date because it was the day my life turned upside down. It was about 9 in the morning. My husband, Walter, had left early to do a handyman job at a house nearby. He was retired, but always liked to work, to do some carpentry jobs, fix things. Said that sitting idle at home made his head feel bad. I had just finished my coffee. Coffee with milk, 2 slices of bread with butter, just the way I'd always had it my whole life. I was washing the cup in the sink when the doorbell rang. It wasn't common to receive visitors at that hour. My kids always called ahead when they were coming. The neighbors I was closest with did too. But the doorbell rang, that chime I was so used to hearing. I dried my hands on the dish towel and went to the door. When I opened it, there was a woman standing there on my porch, a woman I'd never seen in my life. She must have been about 60, maybe 60-something. Short hair, nicely done, dyed brown. She was dressed in black dress pants and an elegant beige blouse, had a purse hanging from her shoulder. Her face was serious, but it wasn't a mean look. It was the face of someone who was there for an important reason, you know? The face of someone who had something heavy to say. I looked at her without understanding anything and said, "Good morning. Can I help you?" She looked right in my eyes and asked, "Are you Walter's wife?" My heart gave a little jump. I don't know why. Something in her voice, in the way she said my husband's name, gave me a cold feeling in my stomach. But I answered, "Yes, I am. Why?" She took a deep breath and said, "My name is Margaret. I moved to this street 2 months ago. I live in that blue house, 3 houses down. But I need to talk to you about something very important. I met your husband 20 years ago." 20 years? 2 decades. I stood there frozen, holding the door, trying to process what she had just said. Met my husband 20 years ago? How? From where? Why was she at my door telling me this now? "You can come in," I said, kind of awkwardly. "Let's have some coffee. I'm not understanding this very well." Margaret came in. I closed the door behind her and took her to the living room. Offered coffee, but she declined. Said she'd already had some. We sat on the couch, me on one side, her on the other. My heart was beating faster now. I didn't know what to expect. Was she going to tell me that my husband had done something wrong 20 years ago? Was it about money, about work? "Mrs. Eleanor," she began, and I hadn't even told her my name yet, but she must have asked someone on the street. "I came here today because after I moved to this street, I saw the name on your mailbox, Walter Morrison. When I saw that name, my heart almost stopped. Because I met a Walter Morrison 20 years ago, and I never forgot him. I never forgot what happened. I was squeezing my hands in my lap, nervous. "What are you talking about? What story is this?" Margaret took a deep breath again. You could see she was nervous, too, that this wasn't easy for her. In 2003, I worked at a hospital in Clearfield. I was a nurse there. I worked at that hospital for 15 years before I retired. And one day, in October 2003, a man came to the hospital accompanying a pregnant young woman. A very young woman, must have been about 20-something. She was in labor. I felt my stomach turn. Where was this conversation going? The man who was with her, Margaret continued, introduced himself to me and the doctor as Walter Morrison. He said he was the baby's father, signed all the papers, all the hospital documents. The young woman was very nervous, very scared. She barely spoke, but he stayed by her side the whole time. And when the baby was born, a baby girl was born, a beautiful, healthy little girl who cried as soon as she came out. I couldn't speak. My throat was dry, my head was spinning. Father of the child, Walter, my Walter, in 2003. I remember that day perfectly, Margaret said, and her voice was trembling a little now, because what happened next was one of the saddest things I've ever seen in my life as a nurse. The young woman stayed with the baby for 2 days, but on the 3rd day, when I arrived for my shift, Walter was sitting in the hallway alone, with the baby in his arms, crying. He was crying. I put my hand to my mouth. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked where the baby's mother was, she continued. He told me she had left during the night, that she had left a note saying she couldn't be a mother, that she was very scared, that she couldn't handle the pressure, and that she had disappeared. She left without saying where she was going. Left the baby behind. Tears started falling down my face. I didn't even know why I was crying yet. I still hadn't fully understood the magnitude of it all, but something inside me already knew that my life was about to crumble. Walter kept the baby, Margaret said, and now she also had tears in her eyes. He registered the girl at the courthouse as a single father. The mother's name was left blank on the birth certificate. The child received his last name, Walter Morrison. Father, listed, mother, not listed, and he took that little baby out of the hospital 3 days later. I never heard from him again, never saw him again in my life until I moved to this street and saw the name on the mailbox. I was shaking, really shaking, my hands, my legs, everything. You're telling me, I managed to say with my voice failing, that my husband has a 20-year-old daughter that I never knew existed? Margaret nodded slowly. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Eleanor. I'm truly sorry. I thought a lot about whether I should come here or not. I spent 2 months racking my brain because I didn't know if the Walter on the mailbox was the same Walter I met at the hospital. But then I saw him leaving the house the other day. It's him. I recognized him right away. He's older, of course, we all are, but it's him. And I couldn't stay quiet, because if I were you, I'd want to know. I'd want to know that my husband has a daughter he's hidden for 20 years. 20 years. 2 whole decades, since 2003. I was doing the math in my head. In 2003, I was 57 years old. Walter was 60. We'd already been married for 35 years by then. Our 3 children were already adults. Paul was 33, Rebecca was 30, Michael was 27. We were already grandparents. And him? He had a baby daughter with a 20-year-old woman. Are you sure? I asked, still wanting to believe it was a mistake. Are you sure it was him? Absolutely, Margaret answered. I never forget a face, Mrs. Eleanor. It's part of my profession. And besides, the full name was the same, Walter Morrison. And when I saw him leaving the house that morning, I was certain. He was wearing a red plaid shirt, that same shirt I remember him wearing at the hospital 20 years ago. I know it seems crazy to remember a shirt, but everything from that day was etched in my memory. It was a very striking situation. I didn't know what to do, didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to scream at that woman, tell her to leave my house, say she was lying, making up stories. But I looked in her eyes and saw she was telling the truth. Saw that she had come to my house because she thought it was the right thing to do. And I knew, deep in my heart, that she wasn't lying. Where is this child now? I asked. Do you know what happened to her? Margaret shook her head. I don't know. After he left the hospital with the baby, I never heard anything more. I don't know where he took the girl. I don't know if he kept her, if he gave her up for adoption. I don't know anything. I just know he registered her as his daughter and left the hospital with her in his arms. I got up from the couch, couldn't sit anymore, started pacing back and forth in the living room. My head was exploding. Walter, my Walter, the man I met when I was 20 at a county fair in 1965, the man who asked me to be his girlfriend under an apple tree, who married me in 1968 in a simple ceremony at the town church, who worked his whole life as a school janitor to support our family, who never missed bringing money home, who never raised a hand to me or the boys, who was always a present husband, a dedicated father. How had he done this? How had he had an affair with a 20-year-old woman? How had he gotten her pregnant? How had he accompanied her in childbirth, registered the child, and I had never suspected anything? What month was it? I asked, still pacing back and forth. Do you remember? October, second week of October 2003, Margaret answered. I remember because it was right after Columbus Day. October 2003. I tried to remember what was happening in my life at that time, where I was, what I was doing, why I didn't notice anything. And then the memory came to me. October 2003 was when Rebecca, my middle daughter, was hospitalized. She'd had complications in her second pregnancy, had to stay in the hospital for 3 weeks, severe preeclampsia. I spent all day at the hospital with her, left home early in the morning, and only came back at night. Walter was working, taking care of the house, or that's what I thought he was doing. He cheated on me, I whispered, more to myself than to Margaret. He cheated on me and had a daughter, and I didn't know anything. Margaret stood up too, came to me and took my hand. Mrs. Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I'm truly sorry to be the bearer of this news. I thought for a long time about whether I should tell or not, but I thought you deserved to know the truth. You deserve to know that there's a 20-year-old woman out there who is your husband's daughter. I squeezed her hand. She was right. As much as it hurt, as much as it was destroying my heart in that moment, I deserved to know. I needed to know. Margaret stayed about 10 more minutes at my house, gave me her phone number, said that if I needed anything, any clarification, she was available. Said she had kept some notes from that time because it was a case that had really affected her, that if I wanted to see the records, she could try to get them. I thanked her. I think I thanked her. I was so dazed I could barely form complete sentences. When she left, I closed the door and stood there in the middle of the living room. The house was silent, a heavy, suffocating silence. I looked at the photos on the wall, wedding photos, photos of the boys when they were little, birthday photos, Christmas photos, vacation photos. 55 years of marriage recorded there in picture frames. 55 years that now seemed like a lie. I sat back down on the couch, grabbed a pillow and hugged it against my chest. And then I started to cry. Really cry. That crying that comes from deep in the soul that makes your whole body shake. I cried for myself. I cried for the 20-year-old woman who had been seduced by a 60-year-old married man. I cried for the baby who had been abandoned by her mother and registered by a father who had to hide her existence. I cried for all the years I had lived without knowing that there was a child in the world who carried my husband's last name and whom I had never met. And while I cried there alone in my living room, I knew that when Walter came home that afternoon, nothing would ever be the same again. I was going to look him in the eyes and demand the truth, the whole truth. Because after 55 years of marriage, I deserved at least that. I stayed on that couch for hours. I don't know how much time passed. Could have been an hour, could have been 3. Time had stopped for me. I looked at the clock on the wall, saw the hands moving but couldn't process it. My head was somewhere else. It was in 2003. It was imagining my husband with a young woman. It was imagining him at the hospital, holding a baby that wasn't from our children. It was imagining how many times he had lied to me during all those years. I remember I got up at some point and went to the bathroom to wash my face. The cold water didn't help much. My eyes were swollen from so much crying. My face was pale. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman who was there. It seemed like I had aged 10 years that morning. The wrinkles seemed deeper. The gray hair seemed grayer. I was a 75-year-old woman who had just discovered she didn't know the man she'd slept next to for more than 50 years. I went back to the living room, sat in the armchair this time, not the couch. Couldn't sit on the couch where I had talked with Margaret. I stayed there waiting. Walter had said he'd come back for lunch. It was a little past noon when I looked at the clock again. He should arrive any moment, and I didn't know what I was going to do, didn't know what I was going to say. How do you confront a man about something like this? How do you look in the eyes of someone you've loved for more than 5 decades and ask if he had a hidden daughter? I heard the sound of the gate. My heart raced. Then I heard the key in the lock, the door opening, his footsteps in the entrance. Walter came in whistling a little tune. He always did that when he was in a good mood. Came home whistling or humming something. This was the man I knew, the cheerful, hard-working man who came home and greeted me with a smile. He appeared at the living room door, was wearing a blue shirt, dirty with dust, old jeans, the cap he always wore, had sweat on his face. The carpentry work was hard, even for someone who just did odd jobs. When he saw me sitting in the armchair, his smile disappeared. "Eleanor, what's wrong? You look like you've been crying." I didn't answer right away. I kept looking at him, trying to see some sign, something different, but it was just the same Walter, the same man I'd seen every day for 55 years. "Sit there," I said, pointing to the couch. My voice was firmer than I expected. He frowned, worried, took off his cap, threw it on the couch, and sat down. "Did something happen? Is it one of the kids? Rebecca, Paul?" "It's none of the kids," I answered. I took a deep breath. Felt the tears wanting to come again, but I held back. I needed to be strong. "A woman came here this morning. A woman I'd never seen. Her name is Margaret." I saw his face change. It was subtle, but I saw it. His eyes widened a little. The color left his cheeks a bit. His hands, which were resting on his thighs, clenched. "Margaret," I repeated. "She said she met you 20 years ago at a hospital in Clearfield. She was a nurse there." The silence that followed was the worst silence of my life. Walter just stared at me. His mouth opened a little, like he was going to say something. But nothing came out. He swallowed hard, ran his hand over his face, and then looked down. "Walter," I said, and now my voice was shaking. "Look at me. Look me in the eyes and tell me this woman is lying. Tell me you didn't have a daughter in 2003 with a 20-year-old woman." He didn't look at me, kept looking at the floor. His hands were shaking now, I could see. And in that moment I knew that everything Margaret had told me was true. Every word. "Speak, Walter." My voice came out louder now. "Speak. Do you have the courage to just sit there without saying anything? After 55 years of marriage, don't you have the courage to look me in the face?" He raised his face, and I saw tears in his eyes. Tears. In all the years we'd been together, I'd seen Walter cry maybe 3-4 times, when his father died, when his mother died, when Paul had a motorcycle accident and almost died. But there, in that moment, I saw tears running down his face. "Eleanor," he began, but his voice failed. "No." I got up from the armchair. "Don't come with tears. I want the truth. The whole truth. Now." He ran his hand over his face, wiping the tears. Took several deep breaths, and then began to speak. And what he told me that afternoon was worse than everything I had imagined. "In 2002, he began in a low voice, "I met a woman. She worked at the pharmacy near the school where I was a janitor. Her name was Vanessa. She was 21 years old. 21 years old. He was 60. I felt nausea rising. I'd go there to buy my blood pressure medicine once a month, and she'd always help me, always friendly, always smiling. We started talking, nothing much at first, just pharmacy talk. But then she started asking questions about my life, about my work, and I don't know how to explain what happened. I don't know. Continue, I said, with my arms crossed, standing in front of him. She started getting closer. One day she asked me to wait for her to close the pharmacy because she was afraid to go home alone at night. I waited, walked her to the bus stop, and it became routine. I'd wait for her a few times a week. We'd talk. She'd tell me about her life. She was from a poor family, lived with her mother and 2 younger siblings in a trailer. Her father had left when she was a child. She had to work to help at home. I didn't want to feel sorry for that woman, but part of me did. A 21-year-old woman, without a father, working to support the family. And then an older man appears, stable, married. I could imagine how it had happened. And then? I asked, because he had stopped talking. And then, one day she invited me to go to her house. Said her mother and siblings had traveled to the countryside to visit an aunt, that she was alone and scared. I went. God forgive me, Eleanor, but I went. And that day I betrayed our marriage. I sat back down in the armchair. My legs were weak. Hearing him talk like that, confessing, was like taking a knife to the chest. But I needed to hear everything. Was it just once? I asked. He shook his head. No, it was a few months. She kept looking for me. Said she'd fallen in love with me, that I was different from the boys her age. And I was feeling old, Eleanor. I was 60 years old. You were always busy with Rebecca, who was pregnant, with the grandkids. I felt invisible in my own house, and she made me feel young again, made me feel important. I closed my eyes, tried not to scream, tried not to get up and hit him, because that's what I wanted to do. Wanted to scream that I had spent 50 years of my life taking care of him, taking care of the house, raising the kids, working as a seamstress to help with expenses. And he had felt invisible. He had looked for attention in the arms of a woman the age of his granddaughter. When did she get pregnant? I asked, keeping my eyes closed. It was in March 2003. She told me in April. Said she was a month pregnant. I panicked, Eleanor. I panicked completely. I was afraid you'd find out, afraid the kids would find out, afraid of losing everything. And what did you do? I opened my eyes and looked at him. I gave her money. Offered to pay for an abortion, but she didn't want to. Said she wasn't going to kill the child. Said she was going to have the baby no matter what. I tried to convince her several times, but she didn't change her mind. So he had tried to make her abort, had tried to get rid of the problem. What kind of man was this sitting in front of me? During the months she was pregnant, I'd go see her. Sometimes I'd bring money, bring food. She didn't tell anyone I was the father, not even her mother. Said the baby's father was a boyfriend who had left. And I prayed every day that you wouldn't find out anything. And in October she had the baby, I said, remembering what Margaret had told me. He nodded. She went into labor on a Tuesday morning, called me desperate. I went to get her and took her to the hospital in Clearfield because it was far from here. Thought no one would recognize me. We stayed there. The delivery took a long time, and when the baby was born, he stopped talking. More tears coming down. He was sobbing now. When the baby was born, he continued, I held her in my arms, and she was perfect, Eleanor. Tiny, with a tuft of black hair, crying. And I looked at that child and thought, this is my daughter, my blood. And at the same time I thought, I destroyed my life. I was crying again too, couldn't hold back. Vanessa stayed 2 days with the baby at the hospital, but she was very strange. Didn't want to hold the child, cried all the time, had anxiety attacks. The nurses thought it was postpartum depression, but on the night of the second day, I arrived at the hospital and Vanessa had disappeared, had left. Left a note on the bed saying she couldn't be a mother, that she didn't have the structure, that she was very scared, and that she was going far away. And she apologized. And you kept the child? I said. I kept her because I couldn't leave her there, couldn't give her up for adoption. She was my daughter, Eleanor, my flesh and blood daughter, and her mother had abandoned her. What was I going to do? I registered her in my name, put my last name on her. And then? Then what? I asked. He took a deep breath. The hardest part was coming now. I could feel it. Then I called my sister, Teresa. You know, she's been living in Wyoming since the early 90s. We hardly spoke, but I called her, told her part of the truth. Said a distant cousin of ours had died in childbirth and left an orphaned baby. Said I couldn't take care of the child, that you didn't know anything, that I was desperate and asked her to keep the baby, to raise her as if she were her daughter. I widened my eyes. Teresa, his sister who we saw once every 3-4 years. Teresa who always complained she couldn't have children. Teresa who one day, back in 2004, told us she had adopted a little girl, a cousin's daughter who had passed away. Josephine, I whispered. Teresa's daughter, whom we met when she was about 2 years old on a visit. That girl is my daughter, Walter completed. Always has been. Teresa knows it's not from any cousin. She knows the truth. I told her later, but she agreed to keep the baby, agreed to raise her and never tell anyone. And during all these years, I sent money every month to her. You always thought I was helping my sister because she was struggling, but the money was to support Josephine, to pay for school, clothes, food, everything. I put my hands on my head. This was too much. This was too big to process. He had given his daughter to his sister. His sister had raised the girl as if she were an adopted daughter. And for 20 years, every time he sent money, every time he called Teresa, every time we visited her and saw Josephine growing up, he knew. He knew that was his daughter. And I didn't know anything. Josephine, I said, remembering the girl. That quiet girl with long hair. We watched her grow up in photos Teresa sent. We even gave her birthday presents a few times. I know, Walter said. I know. And every time you talked about her, every time you said she was pretty, that she was well-mannered, I died inside, because I knew you were praising my daughter without knowing. I got up again, started pacing back and forth. My head was exploding. 20 years. 20 years of lies, 20 years sending money to support a secret daughter, 20 years seeing photos of a girl growing up and knowing she was his, but pretending she was just the adopted niece of his sister-in-law. And Vanessa? I asked. Did you hear from her after? He shook his head. Never again. She disappeared. I tried to look for her in the first few months but didn't find her. She must have moved to another city, another state. I don't know. Vanished off the map. And you never thought of telling me? I stopped in front of him. Never. In 20 years you never thought I deserved to know, that our children deserve to know they have a sister? Every day, he answered, looking at me with those red eyes from so much crying. Every day I thought about telling, but how? How was I going to come to you after 1 year, 2 years, 5 years and say, oh, by the way, I have a daughter I hid? The more time passed, the more impossible it became, and I was afraid, Eleanor, very afraid. Afraid of losing you, afraid of losing my kids, afraid of destroying our family. And you think you didn't destroy it? My voice came out loud now. You think this isn't destruction? You cheated on me with a woman young enough to be your granddaughter. You had a daughter. You registered her, gave her to your sister to raise, sent money for 20 years, and thought that wasn't going to destroy anything? He didn't answer, just stayed there, hunched over on the couch, sobbing. I took a deep breath, tried to calm down, but couldn't. The anger was consuming every piece of me. You know, Teresa called here 3 months ago asking if we were going to Josephine's graduation. She's finishing her education degree, and you convinced me not to go. Because you said you had back pain, that the trip would be tiring. But it was because you were afraid I'd find out something, wasn't it? He nodded slowly. You're a coward, I said. And my voice was ice cold now. You're a coward and a liar. I spent 55 years of my life by your side, 55 years believing you were an honest man, a man of your word. And now I find out that for 20 of those years, you were living a gigantic lie. I know, he said. I know what I am, and I don't expect you to forgive me. Don't expect you to stay with me after this. I just need you to know that I loved you all these years. loved and still love. What I did was horrible, was unforgivable, but it never meant I didn't love you. I laughed, a bitter laugh, with no humor at all. Love? You call that love? You think love is cheating, lying, hiding a daughter for 20 years? He didn't answer, and in that moment, I realized there was nothing more to say. Not in that moment. I was exhausted, emotionally drained. My whole body hurt. I want you to get off that couch, I said. Go to the guest room, get your things, and go sleep there. I don't want you near me now. I don't want to look at you. He got up slowly, passed by me without looking in my eyes. I heard his footsteps in the hallway, heard the guest room door closing, and then I sat on the couch and let the tears fall freely. I cried until I had no more tears. Cried until I felt there was nothing left inside me but an enormous, deep, painful emptiness. 55 years of marriage. And in a single morning, everything had crumbled, everything had turned to dust. The 3 days that followed after that conversation were the quietest of my life. Walter stayed locked in the guest room. I stayed in the living room or in my room. We didn't talk. When he needed to go out, I'd hear the door opening, his footsteps through the house, and then the front door closing. When he came back, it was the same thing. Silence. A heavy silence that seemed to suck all the air out of the house. I couldn't eat. I'd prepare something because it was automatic, because it was what I'd always done. But when I'd bring the food to my mouth, my stomach would churn. I could drink some coffee in the morning, maybe eat half a piece of toast. At night, nothing. My clothes started getting loose on me. I'd look in the mirror and see a woman who was withering inside and out. The nights were worse. I'd lie in bed, the same bed I had shared with Walter all those years, and stare at the ceiling. I'd try to sleep, but couldn't. When I closed my eyes, the images would come. I'd imagine him with that woman, imagine him at the hospital holding the baby, imagine him calling his sister, making up that lying story. And I'd imagine all the moments of the last 20 years when he had lied to me without me noticing. How many times had he left the house saying he was going somewhere and was actually going to see his daughter? How many times had he been on the phone talking with Teresa while I was right there, not knowing they were talking about Josephine? How many times had he looked me in the eyes and lied? On the third day, I made a decision. I needed to tell my children. They deserved to know. And I couldn't carry this alone anymore. It was too big a weight. It was killing me inside. I called Paul first. He's my oldest son. Always been the most level-headed, the most thoughtful. Works as an accountant at a big company. Been married to Faith for 28 years. Has 2 grown daughters. When he answered the phone, I just said, "Paul, I need you to come to the house. It's urgent. Bring Rebecca and Michael too. I need to talk to all 3 of you." His voice got worried right away. "Mom, did something happen? Are you okay? Is it Dad?" "I can't talk on the phone," I answered. "Please, get everyone together and come this afternoon if you can. It's important." He must have sensed from my voice that it was serious, because he didn't ask more questions. Said he'd call his siblings and that they'd be there at 3 p.m. When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking. How was I going to tell them that? How does a mother tell her children that their father, the man they admired, had cheated on his wife and had a secret daughter for 20 years? 3 p.m. came too fast and too slow at the same time. I had tidied up the house, put on some lipstick, tried to look presentable. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw there was no way. My eyes were sunken. My face was thin. I looked like I had aged years in a matter of days. The doorbell rang. I went to answer. Paul arrived first, tall, broad shoulders, hair starting to turn gray on the sides. He hugged me at the door. "Mom, what's going on? You look terrible." Before I could answer, Rebecca arrived. My middle daughter, always been the most emotional of the 3. Works as a teacher at a public school. Married to Julian. Has 3 kids. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears right away. "Mom, You've lost weight. What happened? Are you sick? Come in, honey. That's all I could say. Michael arrived 10 minutes later, my youngest. Always looked the most like his father physically. Works as a mechanic, has his own shop, divorced, lives alone. He looked at me and frowned. Where's Dad? He's in the guest room, I answered. I called you all here because I need to tell you something. Sit down. The three sat on the couch, lined up, looking at me with those worried faces. I stood in front of them because if I sat down, I don't think I'd be able to get up again. I needed to stand, needed to say it all at once. Last Tuesday, I began, and my voice was already failing. A woman came to the house, a woman I'd never seen, and she told me something about your father, something that will change everything. What woman? Tell us what? Paul asked. I took a deep breath. She told me that in 2003, your father had an affair with a 21-year-old woman, and that this woman got pregnant, and that in October of that year, a baby girl was born. The silence that fell in the room was absolute. The three just stared at me as if I had spoken in another language, as if their brains weren't processing the words. What? Rebecca was the first to speak. Mom, what story is this? What woman? What baby? Your father cheated on me, I said, and the tears started falling. He had an affair. The woman got pregnant. He accompanied her to the hospital when the baby was born, registered the child in his name, and then gave the girl to Teresa to raise, making up a story that she was a cousin's daughter who had died. Teresa? Michael stood up from the couch. Aunt Teresa, her daughter, Josephine. She's your sister, I completed. She's not adopted from any cousin. She's your father's daughter, always has been. For 20 years he sent money there. For 20 years he lied to everyone. To me, to you, to everyone. Rebecca started crying. Not a contained cry, it was loud, desperate crying. She put her hands on her face and started sobbing. Paul was paralyzed, mouth open, eyes wide, and Michael? Michael clenched his fists. I'm going to kill him, Michael said with his voice shaking with rage. I'm going to that room right now, and I'm going to kill him. Michael, no! Paul grabbed his brother's arm, but his voice was also agitated. Wait. Mom, did Dad confirm this? Did you confront him? I did, I answered. He confessed everything. Told about the woman, about the affair, about the baby's birth, about giving her to Teresa, everything. He confessed everything. Paul let go of Michael's arm and ran his hands over his face. I don't believe it. I can't believe it. Dad, our dad did this? He did. My voice came out almost a whisper. And I don't know what to do. I don't know how to live with this, how to look at him again, how to continue in this house. Rebecca got up and came to hug me. She was shaking. Mom, you have to leave him. You can't stay with a man who did this, who cheated on you, who had a daughter and hid her for 20 years. She's right, Michael said. Mom, you deserve better. You don't deserve this. But Paul was quiet. He had sat back down on the couch, head down, hands clasped. I need to talk to him, he finally said. I need to hear it from his mouth. It won't help anything, Michael shot back. What's he going to say? That he's sorry? That it was a mistake? A mistake is forgetting to buy bread. This here is a betrayal that lasted 20 years. Even so, Paul insisted, I need to hear it from him. Where is he? Before I could answer, we heard the guest room door opening, footsteps in the hallway, and then Walter appeared at the living room entrance. He looked horrible, unshaven, red eyes, wrinkled clothes. When he saw the 3 children there, he stopped. You know, he said, it wasn't a question. It was a statement. Michael advanced toward him. You bastard, you liar! Paul managed to hold him back before he reached his father. Let go, Paul, let go. This man doesn't deserve to be called a father. Michael, stop, Paul shouted. Stop it. Walter didn't move. Stayed there standing, receiving the insults, the accusations, as if he knew he deserved every word. Rebecca was crying even louder now. How could you do this, Dad? How? We admired you. We thought you were an example. And now? Now I look at you, and I don't know who you are." "I know there's no excuse," Walter said with his hoarse voice. "I know there's no forgiveness for what I did, but I need you to know that I love you. Always have loved. You're my children. That never changed. But we have a sister," Paul finally said. "A sister we don't know. A sister you hid from us our whole lives. How do you expect us to deal with this?" Walter lowered his head. "I don't expect anything. I don't expect anything from you. I just hope that maybe one day you can— I don't know. I don't expect anything." Michael managed to break free from Paul and went straight for the door. "I can't stay here. Can't look at you." He left, slamming the door. We heard his car starting and leaving at high speed. Rebecca looked at me, then at her father. "Are you going to stay with him, Mom?" I didn't know what to answer because I myself didn't know. Paul stood up. "Mom, you don't need to decide anything now. You need time. We all need time. But I'm going to say one thing." He looked at his father. "You destroyed this family. You destroyed the trust we had, and it's going to take a long, long time for us to be able to process this, if we ever can." He kissed my forehead. "Mom, whatever you need, we're here. You're not alone." He looked at Rebecca. "Come on, let's go. Let's let Mom rest." Rebecca hugged me once more, really tight. "I love you, Mom. You didn't deserve this." And then they left. I stood there in the living room alone with Walter. He hadn't moved from the entrance, was standing there like a statue. "You destroyed them," I said. "See what you did? You didn't just destroy me, you destroyed them too." "I know," he answered. "And you know the worst part? Josephine isn't to blame for anything. She's a victim in all this too. A girl who was registered, given to someone else to raise, who grew up thinking she was one thing when she was actually another. You destroyed her life too." He started crying again, but I didn't feel sorry, couldn't feel sorry for him. "Go back to that room," I ordered, "and don't come out unless it's absolutely necessary. I don't want to see you." He obeyed, went back to the guest room, and closed the door. In the days that followed, the news spread. Paul told Faith, Rebecca told Julian. Michael must have told his friends, his ex-wife. And as small towns are, soon everyone knew. The neighbors looked at me with pity when I went out to buy something. The church ladies called, offering prayers. Some came to visit, bringing food, trying to console me, but nothing helped. I was in a deep hole and couldn't get out. Rebecca came to see me every day, brought the granddaughters to distract me, but I could barely talk to the girls. I was there on automatic, smiling when they said something funny, but inside, I was dead. Paul came on weekends, tried to talk to me about practical things, money, bills, documents. "Mom, if you want to get divorced, I'll help you with everything. Lawyer, paperwork, whatever you need." But I couldn't think about that. Divorce at 75, after 55 years of marriage? To go live where? Do what? Michael didn't come back. He'd call to talk to me, but always asked first, "Is Dad there?" And when I said yes, he'd say, "Then I'm not coming, Mom. I can't see his face." It was Rebecca who brought up the question that no one had asked yet. It was about 2 weeks after everything had come out. She was sitting with me in the kitchen having coffee. "Mom," she said, stirring the spoon in her cup, "have you thought about meeting her? Josephine?" I stopped with the cup in the air. Meet Josephine. The idea had crossed my mind a few times, but I always pushed it away because it was too complicated, too painful. "I don't know if I can," I answered. "But Mom, she's our sister, and she's not to blame for any of this. She was as much a victim as you, maybe even more, because she grew up her whole life without knowing the truth about who she really was." I knew Rebecca was right, but the pain was too great. How was I going to look at that young woman and not see my husband's betrayal? How was I going to be able to separate one thing from the other? "Let me think about it." That's all I could say. But the truth is, I thought about it every day. Every single day. Josephine was 20 years old now, was finishing college, had dreams, plans, and didn't know that the man she thought was a distant uncle was actually her father. Didn't know that the story of the cousin who had died was a lie. Didn't know anything. Did she deserve to know, or would it be better to leave everything as it was? But how to leave it as it was when now I knew, when my children knew? These questions spun in my head non-stop, day, night, in the shower, at mealtime, all the time. A month after the revelation, I had lost 18 pounds. My clothes were huge on me. The doctor I consulted said I had depression, prescribed medication. I took it, but it didn't help much. The sadness was stronger than any medicine. And Walter? Walter had become a shadow in his own house. He only left the guest room to go to the bathroom or to get food in the kitchen. Didn't talk to me, didn't try to apologize anymore. I think he had understood that there was no possible excuse, that he had ruined everything in a way that couldn't be fixed. One night, I was lying in bed, looking at the ceiling, as always, when I heard a noise coming from the guest room. Crying, muffled crying, like he was trying not to make noise. And for the first time in all that time, I felt something besides anger and pain. I felt a little bit of pity because I realized he was suffering too, that he had also lost everything, his family, his children, his wife, everyone's respect. But even so, I didn't go there, didn't console him, because his suffering was the consequence of his choices. And I couldn't carry that too. I was already carrying too much weight. It was 2 whole months living in that hell. 2 months waking up every day with that weight on my chest. 2 months pretending everything was fine when someone called. 2 months trying to understand how to move forward when the ground had been ripped out from under my feet. Rebecca kept coming to see me almost every day. She insisted I needed to get out of the house, do something, not just rot there, but I had no will for anything. The only thing I did was sit on the porch in the afternoon, looking at the street, watching life go by. Kids going to school, neighbors coming back from work. Everything continued the same out there, but inside me, nothing was the same as before. It was on one of those afternoons, sitting on the porch, that I had an unexpected visit. It was Margaret, the nurse who had come to my house 2 months ago and changed my life forever. She passed by my house, saw me sitting there, and stopped. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said, with that gentle voice of hers. "How are you?" I gave a weak smile. "The way it goes, Margaret. The way it goes." She asked permission and sat in the chair next to mine. We stayed in silence for a while, a comfortable silence. She didn't try to ask questions, didn't try to give advice, just stayed there present. "Did you talk to him?" she asked after a few minutes. "To Walter?" "I did," I answered. "He confessed everything, every detail. The woman, the pregnancy, the baby, everything. And now we live in this house like 2 strangers. Him in the guest room, me in my room. We barely talk." Margaret nodded. "And the girl, Josephine, have you thought about meeting her?" That question again, the same one Rebecca had asked, the same one Paul had suggested in a more discreet way, the same one that haunted my head every day. "I don't know if I can," I admitted. "Every time I think of her, I think of the betrayal, the lie, how my husband deceived me for 20 years. How am I going to look at that young woman and not see all of this?" Margaret was quiet for a moment, then said, "Can I tell you something, Mrs. Eleanor? Something that happened to me?" I looked at her and nodded. Many years ago, when I was in my early 30s, I found out my husband had cheated on me. It was with a co-worker of his. Lasted 6 months. When I found out, I thought I was going to die. The pain was so great, I wanted to disappear. I wanted to separate, wanted to never see his face again, but we had 2 small children, and I was afraid. Afraid of being alone, of not being able to support the kids alone. So I stayed. I forgave, or at least tried to forgive. I listened in silence. Didn't know Margaret had been through something similar. For years I carried that. The resentment, the anger, the humiliation. I'd look at him and remember the betrayal. Everything he did irritated me. I had become a bitter woman, you know? And it was making me sick. Until one day, a friend of mine told me something that changed my perspective. She said, "Margaret, you can choose to stay trapped in what he did, or you can choose to move forward. It doesn't mean forgetting, doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, but it means you're not going to let his betrayal define the rest of your life." I felt a tightness in my chest, because that was exactly what was happening to me. I had let Walter's betrayal consume me completely. "And Josephine," Margaret continued, "she has nothing to do with the choices Walter made. She's a victim in all this. Was registered, given to someone else to raise, grew up without knowing who her father really was. She deserves to know the truth, and maybe you deserve to meet her, not for Walter, but for you. Because by closing this cycle, meeting her, maybe you can find some peace." After Margaret left, I kept thinking about what she had said. Was she right? Could meeting Josephine bring me some kind of peace? That night, for the first time in 2 months, I left my room and went to the guest room. I knocked on the door. I heard Walter's voice from the other side, surprised. "Come in." I opened the door. He was sitting on the bed, a book open in his lap. He had lost weight too. His face was more hollow, eyes sunken. He looked like he had aged 10 years. "I want Teresa's phone number," I said straight to the point. He widened his eyes. "Teresa's number? Why?" "Because I'm going to call her and I'm going to ask to talk to Josephine and I'm going to tell her the truth and then I'm going to go there to meet her." Walter stood up in a jump. "Are you sure? You don't need to do this. Don't need to subject yourself to this." "It's not about you," I answered. "It's about me. It's about her. This girl deserves to know who her father is, and I deserve to meet her. I'm not going to let your betrayal steal this from me too." He took a deep breath, went to the dresser drawer and got an old address book. He wrote the number on a piece of paper and handed it to me. "Teresa knows everything. She'll understand." I took the paper and left the room without saying anything more. The next day I waited until 10 in the morning. I knew it was a good time, not too early, not at lunchtime. I sat on the living room couch, the phone in my hand, the paper with the number in the other. I took several deep breaths. My heart was racing. I dialed the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I was going to hang up when I heard the voice on the other side. "Hello? Teresa, it's Eleanor, Walter's wife." There was a silence on the other side, a long silence. Then, "Eleanor, hi, what a surprise." "I imagine it is," I said. "Teresa, I need to talk to you about Josephine." Another silence. And then she sighed. You found out." "I found out. It's been 2 months since I found out that my husband has a daughter who was raised by you. It's been 2 months since I found out that the story of the cousin who died was a lie. It's been 2 months since my life turned upside down." I heard her start crying on the other side of the line. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I'm truly sorry. I didn't want to lie to you, but Walter begged me and Josephine was just a little baby. I couldn't let her go to a shelter. I always wanted to have children and never could. When he offered me the girl, I accepted." "I'm not calling to judge you," I interrupted. "I'm calling because I want to meet her. I want to go there and I want you to tell her the truth. That her father isn't some distant cousin who died. It's Walter, and that she has 3 siblings and a stepmother who didn't know she existed until 2 months ago." Teresa was silent again, then said, "She deserves to know. She always has. I always wanted to tell her, but I was afraid of losing her, afraid she'd hate me for lying her whole life." "Then it's time to tell her," I said. "I'm going there next weekend, if that works. And when I get there, I want to talk to her. I want to look in her eyes. I want her to know that there's a whole family here that didn't know about her existence." "Okay," Teresa answered, her voice trembling. "Come. I'll prepare her. I'll tell her everything before you arrive. She'll be in shock, but it's better to know than to continue living a lie." When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking. But for the first time in 2 months, I felt something different from pain and anger. I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe Just maybe, something good could come out of all this tragedy. I called Rebecca right after, told her what I had done. She started crying on the phone. "Mom, I'm so proud of you. This must be so hard, but you're doing the right thing. I want you and your brothers to go with me," I said. "Josephine needs to meet you too. You're her siblings." Rebecca agreed right away, said she'd talk to Paul. About Michael, she wasn't sure. He was still very angry, very hurt, but she'd try to convince him. In the end, Paul agreed to go. Said it was strange, that he didn't know how he'd react when he saw Josephine, but that he thought it was important to be there. Michael refused. Said he still wasn't ready, that he needed more time. I understood. Everyone has their time to process things. The week that followed was one of the longest of my life. I had to prepare for that trip, for that meeting. I bought new clothes, something simple but nice. Packed my bag, asked Rebecca to help me choose a gift to bring for Josephine. We ended up buying a nice rosary, one of those with wooden beads, and a music box with a ballerina inside. "Do you think she'll like it?" I asked Rebecca at the store. "I think what she'll really like is meeting you, Mom. The rest is just details." The night before the trip, Walter came to me again. He was nervous, pacing back and forth in the living room. "Eleanor, do you want me to go with you? I can go. I can talk to Josephine, explain everything." "No," I interrupted. "You're not going. This isn't about you. You've already done your part, already lied, already hid, already destroyed. Now it's my turn to try to fix what can be fixed, and you're not part of that." He lowered his head. "I understand. Just tell her I'm sorry for everything." I didn't answer, just turned my back and went to finish packing the bag. The bus trip to Wyoming took almost 9 hours. Me, Rebecca, and Paul sat together. Rebecca held my hand the whole time. Paul was quiet, looking out the window, lost in his own thoughts. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. I kept imagining what the meeting would be like, what I was going to say, how she was going to react. Teresa had called me 2 days before the trip. Said she had told Josephine everything, that the girl had been in shock, had cried a lot, had been angry with her for lying her whole life, but after a few days had calmed down and said she wanted to meet me, wanted to meet her siblings, wanted to understand where she came from. We arrived at the bus station in Casper in the late afternoon of Saturday. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Teresa was waiting for us at the exit. I recognized her right away, even though it had been years since we'd seen each other. She was heavier, hair all white, but it was her. When she saw me, she came running, hugged me tight. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "I know," I answered, returning the hug. "I know you were also put in a difficult situation." She greeted Rebecca and Paul. She was nervous, you could see. Her hands trembled as she picked up one of the bags. "Josephine is at home," she said as we walked to the car. "She's very nervous, hardly slept all week, but she really wants to meet you all." The drive to Teresa's house was silent. I looked out the window, seeing the city pass by. A city I didn't know. A city where my stepdaughter that I didn't know existed, had grown up. Teresa's house was simple. A small 2-story house, painted yellow, with a garden in front. When she parked the car and turned off the engine, no one moved for a moment. It was like we were all gathering courage. "Let's go," Rebecca finally said, squeezing my hand. We got out of the car. Teresa opened the gate. We walked to the door, and then she opened it. The first thing I saw was a young woman standing in the living room, tall, thin, long black hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore jeans and a simple white blouse. And when she turned and looked at me, I felt my heart stop, because she had Walter's eyes, those same light brown eyes, almost honey-colored, that I had looked at for 55 years. She had his face shape, his nose. It was undeniable. She was his daughter. Every feature confirmed it. "Josephine," Teresa said softly. "This is Eleanor, and these are Paul and Rebecca, your siblings." Josephine stood where she was, Her eyes were watery. She squeezed her hands together, nervous, and then said with her voice trembling, "Hi." I took a step forward, didn't know what to do, hug her, greet her from afar. But before I decided, she started crying. Not a silent cry, a loud, desperate cry. "I spent my whole life thinking I was an orphan," she said between sobs. "Thinking that my mother and father had died and that I was a burden that Aunt Teresa had agreed to carry. And now I find out my father is alive, that I have siblings, that I have a whole family that never knew about me." Rebecca went to her and hugged her. Josephine clung to my daughter and cried even more. Paul stayed where he was, hands in his pockets, visibly uncomfortable, but with his eyes also watery. I stood there watching that scene, seeing my daughter consoling my husband's secret daughter, and something inside me broke, but not in a bad way. It broke in the way that sometimes needs to break so new things can grow. I approached and put my hand on Josephine's shoulder. She turned and looked at me. And then, without thinking much, I hugged her too. I hugged that girl who hadn't asked to be born, who hadn't asked to be the fruit of a betrayal, who had grown up without knowing who she really was. "You're not a burden," I said in her ear. "You never were. And now you have a family, you have siblings who want to know you, and you have a grandmother. Because I may not be your mother, but I'm married to your father, and that makes me something in your life." Josephine pulled back and looked me in the eyes. "Don't you hate me for existing? For being proof of the betrayal?" "Hate you?" I repeated. "No, my dear. I hate what your father did. Hate the lies, the deception, the 20 years of secrecy. But you're not to blame for anything. You're a victim in all this just as much as I am." She started crying again, and we stayed there hugging, crying together. Rebecca joined the hug, and after a moment, Paul too. We stayed there, the four of us in a collective embrace, in the middle of Teresa's living room. When we finally separated, Teresa brought water for everyone. We sat in the living room. Josephine sat on the couch between Rebecca and Paul. I sat in the armchair across, and then we started talking, really talking. Josephine told about her life, about what it had been like growing up thinking she was an orphan, about how sometimes she felt she didn't belong anywhere, about how she had studied so hard to get into the teaching college because she wanted to be a teacher, wanted to make a difference in children's lives. Paul told about our family, about the 3 siblings, about how they had grown up in a simple house but full of love, about the father who always worked hard, who was always present. He omitted the betrayal part. Of course, she already knew that. Rebecca showed photos on her cell phone, photos of nephews, grandchildren. Josephine looked at each photo with a mixture of fascination and sadness. Fascination at discovering she had a big family, sadness for having lost 20 years without knowing anyone. And I looked at that young woman and saw a good-hearted person, a person who had been hurt, who had grown up without knowing her true origin, but who had become someone good. And I thought, maybe God allowed all this to come out now, because it was the right time. Because 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been ready. 20 years ago, I would have divorced, would have rejected this girl, would have let bitterness consume me. But now, at 75 years old, with a lifetime of experience, I could see beyond the pain. I could see a girl who needed family. We stayed at Teresa's house the whole weekend. Saturday night, we slept there. Teresa had prepared the guest rooms. I could barely sleep. I kept thinking about everything that had happened that day, about what it had been like to see Josephine for the first time, about what it had been like to look in those eyes that were so much like Walter's and still be able to see beyond the betrayal. On Sunday morning, Josephine made breakfast for everyone, said she always did that on weekends, and as she stirred the pans on the stove, frying eggs and making pancakes, I watched her. Her gestures were delicate. She hummed softly while cooking. And I thought, this girl could have been raised by me, could have grown up in my house with my children, but she wasn't, and there was no use thinking about what could have been. We had breakfast all together at the kitchen table. The conversation flowed more naturally than the day before. Josephine asked about the town where we lived, asked about her siblings' lives, about the nephews and nieces she hadn't met yet. Paul talked about his work as an accountant. Rebecca told funny stories about her students at school, and I told about my life as a seamstress, about the old times, about how things were different when I was young. After breakfast, Josephine excused herself and went to her room. She came back holding an old shoebox. She sat on the couch next to me and opened the box. Inside there were photos. Photos of her as a baby, child, teenager, birthday photos, school graduations, outings. "I wanted to show you," she said with her gentle voice. "I wanted you to see what my life was like. It wasn't bad, you know. Aunt Teresa raised me with a lot of love. I always had everything I needed, but I always felt something was missing. I always had an emptiness here inside." She put her hand on her chest. "Now I know what it was. It was not knowing where I came from, not knowing my real family." Rebecca picked up a photo of Josephine at about 5 years old. She was at a birthday party wearing a pink dress, a princess hat on her head. "You were beautiful," Rebecca said with tears in her eyes. "And you still are." Paul was quieter, but you could see he was processing it all. From time to time, he'd look at Josephine, and I saw a strange expression on his face. It wasn't anger, it was confusion. It was trying to fit this new person into the family he'd known his whole life. We spent the afternoon talking. Teresa made a delicious lunch, country chicken with rice, stuffing, salad. We all ate together, like a family. And for a few hours I managed to forget all the pain, all the betrayal, everything that had brought me there. For a few hours, I was just there, present, meeting a girl who had entered my life in the most unexpected way possible. When it was time to leave, late Sunday afternoon, the goodbye was difficult. Josephine hugged me tight, really tight. "Thank you for coming," she whispered in my ear. "Thank you for not hating me. Thank you for giving me a chance." "You don't need to thank me, my dear," I answered. "We're the ones who need to thank you for receiving us, for opening your heart to us, even after discovering that your whole life was built on top of a lie." She pulled back and wiped the tears. "Will you come back? Will you and Rebecca and Paul come back to visit me?" "We will," Rebecca answered before me. "Of course we will. And you can visit us too. Our house is your house now. You're part of the family." Paul, who had been silent most of the time, approached Josephine, put his hand on her shoulder. "It's going to take me some time to get used to all this," he said with that honesty of his. "But you're my sister, and I want to get to know you better. I want you to meet my wife, my daughters. I want you to be part of our lives." Josephine started crying again, hugged Paul, and he hugged her back, even if in a kind of awkward way still. The trip back was different from the way there. Rebecca slept almost the whole time, tired from so much emotion. Paul was quiet, looking out the window, but from time to time he'd look at me and give a small smile. And I kept thinking about everything, about how my life had changed in just 2 months, about how I had discovered a betrayal, had confronted my husband, had told my children, had met his secret daughter, and how in some strange way I had gained something in this whole process. I had gained Josephine. When we got home, it was already night. Walter was sitting in the living room waiting. As soon as he saw us come in, he stood up. The expression on his face was expectation mixed with fear. "How did it go?" he asked, looking at me. I put the suitcase on the floor. Rebecca and Paul came in behind me. "It was good," I answered. "She's a beautiful girl, Walter, inside and out. Teresa did a good job raising her." He breathed, relieved. "Was she very angry when she found out the truth?" "She was in shock," Paul answered, "just like all of us were. But she's strong, stronger than many people would be in a situation like that." "She sent you a message," I said, remembering. "She said she doesn't know yet how she'll deal with all this, with finding out her father is alive, and that he hid her whole life, but that one day, When she's ready, she wants to talk to you, wants to hear your version, wants to understand. Walter sat back down on the couch, put his face in his hands. I don't deserve this. Don't deserve for her to give me a chance. You don't, I agreed, but she's better than you. She has a better heart than yours. The words came out harsh, but they were true. And he knew it. Rebecca and Paul stayed a bit longer. We talked about the trip, about Josephine, about the plans for her to come visit us during the winter holidays. Then they left, and I was alone with Walter again. He kept sitting on the couch. I went to the kitchen, made chamomile tea, and came back to the living room. I sat in the armchair across from him. Eleanor, he began, but I raised my hand, interrupting. Let me talk first, I said. I spent these 2 months wanting to hate you, wanting you to disappear from my life, wanting to be able to erase 55 years and start from scratch. But I can't. We can't go back in time. What's done is done. He looked at me, waiting. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you, I continued. I don't know if what you did can be forgiven. You cheated on me, had a daughter, hid her for 20 years, lied to me every day for 2 decades. This is too big. It's too deep. I know, he said with his hoarse voice, but I took a deep breath. Meeting Josephine made me realize something. I can choose to stay trapped in this anger, this resentment, this pain for the rest of my life. Or I can choose to move forward. It doesn't mean I forgot, doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, but it means I'm not going to let your choices define the rest of my days. Walter was crying again. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm not going to divorce you, I answered, and I saw the relief on his face. But it's not because I forgave you. It's because I'm 75 years old, because we built a life together. We had children, grandchildren. Because at my age, starting from scratch would be harder than learning to live with what happened. I paused, took a sip of tea. But things are going to be different from now on, I continued. You're going to keep sleeping in the guest room. I don't know for how long. Maybe forever. Maybe with time I'll be able to accept you in my room again. But not now. Not now. And you're going to have to earn your children's trust back. You're going to have to prove to them that you've changed, that you're sorry, that you'll never lie again. I promise, he said. I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I did. Don't make me promises, I answered. Show me with actions. Words are easy. You've already proven that. Now show me you can be a better man. He nodded, wiping the tears from his face. In the months that followed, life slowly returned to a new normal. It wasn't the normal from before. It never would be. But it was a possible normal. Walter started going to therapy. Said he needed to understand why he had done what he did, why he had cheated, why he had lied. I thought it was too little, but it was something. Josephine started calling every week. At first the conversations were short, kind of awkward, but over time they got longer, more natural. She'd tell me about college, about her friends, about her plans for the future, and I'd tell her about my day, about family news, about old memories I'd remember. Rebecca created a group chat with all of us, me, her, and Josephine. We'd exchange messages every day, photos, videos, good morning and good night messages. It was strange at first, but it became natural. Paul took longer to get close to Josephine, but eventually he also started calling her from time to time. He took his wife and daughters to meet her, and when they came back, Faith told me she had loved Josephine, that she was a golden girl. Michael was still processing. He kept visiting me, but didn't want to talk about his father or about Josephine. Said he needed more time, and I respected that. Everyone has their time. In December of that year, 2022, Josephine came to visit us for the first time. She stayed a whole week at my house. I prepared the guest room for her, the same room where Walter had been sleeping. I made him go sleep on the couch during that week. He didn't complain. Seeing Josephine in my house was surreal. Seeing her sitting at my dining table eating the food I prepared. Seeing her watching TV in the living room. Seeing her playing with Rebecca's grandchildren who came to visit. It was like gaining a daughter I never knew I wanted. The night before she left, we were sitting on the porch having tea. It was a warm December night. There was a nice breeze blowing. Josephine looked at me and said, "Can I call you Grandma?" I felt my heart tighten. "You want to call me Grandma?" She nodded. "It's just that Aunt Teresa is like a mother to me. But you're my father's wife, and you welcomed me even without having to, even though I'm living proof of the worst thing that ever happened to you. And I feel like you're my grandma. I feel a connection with you that I can't explain." I held her hand. "You can call me Grandma, yes, it would be an honor." She smiled, that beautiful smile that lit up her face. And in that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. Meeting her had been the right decision. Not closing my heart to her had been the right decision. In early 2023, Josephine graduated from college. We went to her graduation. Me, Paul, Rebecca, the granddaughters, the nephews. Walter wanted to go, but I said no. Said that day was hers, not his, that he had already taken too much of her time, that he could wait until she was ready to see him. We watched Josephine go up on stage to get her diploma. She looked beautiful, in a black gown, mortarboard on her head. When they called her name, we stood up and applauded really loud. She looked to where we were and waved, smiling. And I cried. I cried with emotion, with pride, with love for that girl who had entered my life in the most improbable way possible. Today, 3 years after finding out the truth, I can say my life isn't perfect. I still have days when the anger comes back. Days when I look at Walter and feel the weight of everything he did. He still sleeps in the guest room. There's still a distance between us that may never be completely eliminated. But I also gained something precious. I gained Josephine. I gained a granddaughter who calls me every week, who comes to visit during holidays, who sends me flowers on Mother's Day, who calls me Grandma with all that affection. She got a job as a teacher at a public school there in Wyoming. She's making a difference in so many children's lives, and I'm proud of her, very proud. She finally talked to Walter a few months ago. It was a difficult conversation, full of tears, questions, painful answers, but it was necessary. She needed to hear from him why, needed to understand, and he needed to look in the eyes of the daughter he had abandoned and ask for forgiveness. I don't know if she forgave him completely. I think some wounds never fully heal, but they're building a relationship. It's not easy, it's not perfect, but it's something. And me? I'm still here, still in this house, still married to Walter, though things are different. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive him. Some days are harder than others. But I chose to move forward. I chose not to let his mistakes destroy the rest of my life. I chose to open my heart to Josephine, and that was the best decision I could have made. Because in the midst of all this pain, all this betrayal, I gained a granddaughter. And that's a blessing I never expected to receive. If you liked this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you. God bless you all.